Okay, so this is it. Here we are going to do some lighting, which is probably one of the most important parts when you're trying to finish the scene, especially if you gave so much time to model the scene, creating all of those objects, deciding on the composition and distribution of all of those objects. So you don't want to just rush through the lighting. And sometimes when I'm lighting the scene, I even save the multiple instances of the file and play with different lighting setups. So here I will show you how I end up with the final lighting and what my decision process was behind that. So first of all, we can go ahead here, and in the viewport shading we can enable scene lights and scene world for this EV preview, so we actually see what's happening in the scene. And right away this looks much better. We have that emission in place, so this looks already quite alright as a night scene, although it's a little bit flat and there's not much reflections, and we are not taking advantage of those glossy materials here. And at the same time I wanted this to be bright scene, so I want to simulate some ceiling lights there. And when I do a room lighting like this, whether it's a sci-fi corridor or some interior lighting for an office or something, first I will create the lights inside the room in a way that I think the room should be lit, and then I will proceed and place some background lights or some 3-point lighting to create some additional ambience, because the background is part of the final illustration as well, and you want it to play nicely, and you want the final scene to be elevated by the background and the lighting around and not drowned in bad lighting. And here, as I said, I want to simulate some ceiling light panels, and I think the best light to simulate that would be area light. So let's press Shift A and add a light area, and we can bring this up. So let's look from the front, press G then Z and bring it up like this where the ceiling is. Now we can set it up a little bit. So in the object data properties settings we can set power to 150 watts and set size to 2 meters, so it's a little bit larger. Now if we look around, this already looks much better. It looks like there is a large light panel on the ceiling, and the soft light is nicely distributed all around, and it creates those nice soft shadows under the platform and stuff like that. So I really like this right away, but I think it can be taken to another level. So let's look from the top, and I will move this to the bottom right quadrant. So press G and move it somewhere here over the generator. And now I will press Alt D, then X, and duplicate it here. And you probably see where I'm going with this. Now I will shift click the original area light and Alt D once again, press Y and move it up. So one thing you should notice here, when we duplicated the lights, you were able to see how the amount of light in the room is increasing. And that's because these lights have 150 watts by themselves, but area light is not only about power but that size as well. So basically we quadrupled the amount of light that we are emitting into the room. And now if we press 0 on the numpad to look from the camera, this is much brighter. And if you look closer, I want to show you the reason why I used 4 different area lights instead of one giant square. If you look closer here, there are these nice interrupted reflections, and I just think it looks really cool. It adds to the story that this is not some single panel lighting, but there are multiple panels, that the ceiling has its structure too, and it's reflecting on the objects that have some glossiness on them. So I think this looks really cool for a scene like this, and we can now proceed and play with that background. And I really want to tone this into an orange, because we have those orange accents, but the whole scene is quite bright. Even the metal parts look bright gray. So I think it'll help to define the room a little bit better if the background around is orange. And we can do that very easily by adding colored lighting. So let me press Shift A and add another area light. We can bring it really high up, so press G then Z and bring it right here. And now we can change the size to something like 6. So it's larger and it's a soft light. Now switch the pivot point to 3D cursor, so I will hold period on the keyboard and switch the 3D cursor, and let's rotate this 60 degrees on the x-axis, so RX 60 and minus. And now 45 degrees on Z, so RZ 45. So we are facing directly at the camera with that light. And let's bring the power to something really strong like 2000 here. And you can see where the camera touches the background, so we can press G then Z twice to move it back and light the background a little bit better. And we can additionally adjust that local X rotation so it's not shining directly on this corner on the top of the room. So R X twice and bring it down a tiny bit, and we can go even further, so press G and Z twice to move it further away. And now we can play with the colors. So as I said, I want to tone this into some orange color, so something like this. If you really want, you can use the light here from the palette, so you can click the eyedropper tool and pick the color right from there. And now I want to mix this up with the background, and most of the time this is how I get my final results. I don't just set the background color, I play with lights and then accommodate the color of the background so I get the result I really like, and at the same time I get to influence the ambience of the scene with those colored lights. So let's now just select background, go to the materials, and we'll adjust this background to something warmer like this. Or again, if you want to follow this closely, you can pick the color from the palette. So I will do the same and pick the eyedropper tool and pick the color from here. And you will see this will get you this nice orange color. And I know this looks simple when I just pick the colors from the palette, but the process, how I ended up with these colors, was really intuitive. I was really mixing those colors quite a while, so you can do the same basically. If you want to make an exercise from this, you can easily switch the ambience, switch the accent color to something different, and then find some different color for the light and for the background, so you basically get very similar results in terms of the light and background quality, but it's a different color, so you're not just repeating something I'm doing right here. And I will now go back to this light here, and as I said, most of the time I use 3-point lighting, and the reason here is because I really like the vibrance of the background up here, but down here it's a little bit bleak, so I want to shine a little bit of that orange color from the corners as well, so we get a nice consistent result. So let me just duplicate this light with Shift D and enter, and we can press R, Z and 90 degrees to rotate this to the side. This looks already much better, and here you can already see why I use the colored lights and then accommodate the background to them, because here this orange light already gives a nice ambience to this object and the platform, and here on the pillar you can see that nice warm tone reflection. And these are the little details that you can get when you play with color lights a little bit more. And now I want to make this a little bit stronger, but not that much, so we basically given this even more of that orange color. And again, you can see the colors that I've chosen right here, so to be precise we can choose the color right here. And this looks a little bit too much yellow, but I was already planning ahead when I was deciding on these colors, because in the end we will add some world ambience, so it blends all together, and it will be complementary to these lights. It will be in colder blue tones, so that will bring this yellow a little bit down. And now we can duplicate this once again, so Shift D and press R, Z and 180 degrees, so we have the color on the other side as well, and we can pick from the palette. So let me pick this light here. And now we can play with the position of these lights, so you can press R, X twice, and bring it down a little bit. You will see how it gets a little bit more dramatic if you go down, if you shine just from the side. And here as well. And of course you can rotate around the Z-axis to either make these reflections stronger or tone them down, and at the same time you can watch the reflection right here. So when you're deciding on the position of the light, you will have to watch different parts of your scene, different objects, different reflections. And if you like what you see, you can just leave the light right there and move on to another. So I really like this position here where I split this into kind of two parts with the light. I think it gives a nice detail there in combination with those ceiling lights reflections on the top of the generator. And now, as I promised, we will blend this together. So let's go to the world settings and let's pick some color that will complement those lights nicely. So I want to go a colder tone right here, maybe a little bit of violet color. And of course, you can make it brighter like this. You will see how it nicely blends all together, or darker and leave the lighting to those scene lights. And again, I will pick up the color from here. And to be honest, I don't think this toned down this yellow color right here. So I will go ahead and make some adjustment and make this a little bit less orange right here, like this. Okay, and here I can see I made a little bit of a mistake. This shouldn't be visible here, so let's go ahead, go into the edit mode. I will look from the front, toggle the X-ray, select these vertices, back to the camera view, press G then X and move this so it hides behind the wall there. And the one last thing I always do, I go to the render settings, color management, and play with some contrast settings and exposure. And here you can see how medium high contrast will make the scene pop out a little bit more. And of course you can play with the exposure, you can go higher or make the scene darker. I think here the lights are bright enough, so I will go for something like 0.5 for the exposure. And this is basically ready now, it's all lit. To repeat the process and the thought process behind all that. So first I set up a room light in a way that I think it should be best lit in a real world, or basically in a movie if it's a sci-fi setup. And then I will proceed by adding additional lights like the backlight on the background and some lights from the side to give the scene a little bit of that colored ambience. And then I will set up the background color in a way that plays well with both the room and the scene and the lights around. And after that, I will play with that world lighting to blend all of that together with that nice ambience. So I hope this helps you to make your own lighting process a little bit easier. And really, it's very individual. Every scene requires a different lighting and different approach. So again, for me, it's all about that final result. And what I do often is zoom out, look at the scene, look at the thumbnail, and then rotate the lights around to find those reflections and those nice blends of colors to get what I really want. And after that, you can always go to play with color management. And most of the time I use it only to adjust the look and exposure. But at the same time, you have the checkbox to use curves and you can adjust the channels individually to get some really specific results. But I won't go into that right now. I'm really satisfied how this looks. And now we can go ahead and render out the scene. And for the render settings, I will switch the render engine to cycles and switch this to GPU. I have already my optics GPU set up in the preferences, and I will erase the render samples to 512 and enable adaptive sampling. Sometimes it really helps to speed up the process and to get some of those precious seconds out of your render. And now if I press Ctrl B and make a frame around this, hold Z and go to the rendered, we can see how this looks in the cycles for the first time. This is a good place to note. Then when I'm finished with the lighting in EV preview, I always switch to the render preview and addition the lights because it might look a little bit different. So keep that in mind, that I don't do all the lighting settings in the EV engine. I will always switch to the cycles later and play around with those lights and exposure settings if necessary. And of course, we could use some denoising here. And since 2.9, we have denoising tab here, which is unified for all kinds of denoising that Blender offers, whether it's for the render or the viewport, and whether it's a CPU denoising or GPU optics denoising. It's all here right now, which is amazing. So you can just check the viewport denoising and choose the denoising of your choice. So for the preview, I will choose optics. If you don't have the RTX GPU, you can choose open image denoise, which is a new thing in 2.9. So I will switch to optics, and now we have almost a real-time ray tracing preview of the scene, which is amazing. And I'm really satisfied with this. I want to render this right away, so I will check the denoising for render as well and switch this to open image denoise because I like that one the most. I always use the compositor for the final denoising with the open image denoise, and now it's implemented right here in the render settings, so that's great. And to get some more of these precious seconds, since I'm using GPU render, I will go here and increase the number of tiles for the rendering. So if you use GPU, it's always to set this to something higher. It will brush off some of these precious seconds. So let me just switch back to the material preview, and now I will go to the rendering tab, hit F12 for that final render and wait for the result. So this is your final render. Congratulations again to getting all over here. I know this was tedious, it was a handful, but I really hope that these new techniques and procedural workflow will help you to create your scenes in a faster, more efficient way, that you will be able to create all new kinds of illustrations that you wouldn't even think about before taking this episode. So good job again, and I hope to see you in another episode.